If you think my declined card meant I was broke, you're way off. I was just finished paying for people who used me, stole from me, and called it love. Stick around till the end, because this time, the bill they'll get won't come from me. It'll come from the IRS. I still remember the searing sting across my cheek, the metallic tang of blood in my mouth, and the sudden, suffocating silence that fell over the entire restaurant. My credit card had just been declined, but if they thought that meant I was broke, they were dead wrong. It meant I was finally, utterly, completely done paying for a family who'd bled me dry for years, and now they were about to get a bill they'd never see coming. It was my stepsister Tess's 18th birthday, and my mother, ever the orchestrator of grand gestures on my dime, had insisted on dinner at the Sterling Room. It's one of those places with exposed brick and Edison bulbs that charges $30 for a burger. I knew exactly where this was headed. As always, the check would land squarely in front of me. I arrived 15 minutes early, in a navy blue dress I usually reserved for client meetings, only to find my designated seat, tucked away by the kitchen door, behind a wobbly column, where servers would brush past me all evening. "Lena's here," my mother announced when she swept in with Robert and Tess, air-kissing somewhere near my ear, careful not to smudge her lipstick. Robert, my stepfather, didn't even glance my way. He pulled out chairs for them, then settled himself at the head of the table like a king. He'd gained weight, his polo shirt straining, a shirt I'd probably paid for through one of their countless emergencies. Tess, I had to admit, looked beautiful in a pink dress, all curled hair and youthful glow. She gave me a polite, almost distant smile before immediately turning to show her boyfriend something on her phone. Her friends, a gaggle of blondes, filled the remaining seats, chattering about college and spring break. I just watched them, calculating the damage as I scanned the menu. "Order whatever you want," I heard myself say when the server arrived, the words coming out automatically, programmed by years of conditioning. Tess, of course, ordered the lobster. Robert, a ribeye, well done with extra butter. My mother, the salmon, but make sure there's no oil, I'm watching my figure. I ordered a Caesar salad, nothing more. My mother's voice carried that familiar note of judgment. "You're not on another one of your diets, are you?" "Just not that hungry," I lied. The truth was, I'd already done the math. With drinks and dessert, we were looking at close to $800. My checking account had $1,200 and rent was due in 5 days. The conversation flowed around me oblivious. Tess's friends gushed about her early admission to State University, emphasizing early admission as if I hadn't practically written her essays. Robert launched into the same old story about his high school football glory days, the details changing each time, but he always scored the winning touchdown. My mother laughed too loudly at something on Facebook. No one asked about my promotion or the conference I presented at last month. No one asked about me at all. When the food arrived, I watched them eat. Tess photographed every dish for Instagram. Robert sent his steak back, complaining it wasn't hot enough. My mother picked at her salmon for 5 bites before declaring herself stuffed. Then Brittany, one of Tess's friends, piped up, probably out of politeness. "So, Lena, Tess says you work with money? Financial management." I nodded. "Corporate logistics." "That sounds boring," she giggled, and the others joined in. "Someone has to pay for dinners like this," I heard myself say, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The table went silent. Robert's fork paused midair. My mother's smile tightened. Then Tess laughed, a bright, dismissive sound, and the moment passed. "She's always been practical," my mother explained to the girls, as if practicality was a character flaw. Even as a child, always counting her pennies. Dessert came, a massive chocolate cake with 18 candles, and the entire restaurant sang. I smiled and clapped along, the good daughter, the reliable one, the one who could always be counted on to pick up the check. When the server brought the leather folder, he placed it directly in front of me, no questions asked. They all knew. Everyone at that table knew exactly how this would go. I slipped my credit card inside without even looking at the total. A few minutes later, the server returned, leaning close to my ear. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the card was declined. Do you have another form of payment?" The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Every face at the table turned toward me. Tess's friends exchanged glances. My mother's mouth formed a small, performative O of surprise. But it was Robert's reaction that will forever be burned into my memory. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. His face had turned that familiar shade of red I remembered from my teenage years, the color that meant someone was about to pay for his embarrassment. He walked around the table with deliberate, heavy steps, and I knew what was coming before his hand even moved. The slap wasn't as hard as it could have been. Robert was always careful about leaving marks that might raise questions. But in that hushed restaurant, it sounded like a gunshot. My cheek stung, and I tasted copper where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. "You stupid, useless bitch," he hissed. "You can't even do this one simple thing after everything we've done for you." The restaurant had gone completely silent. I could feel every eye on us. A woman at the next table had her phone out, probably recording. Tess wasn't laughing anymore. She was looking at her plate, her birthday tiara slightly askew. I stood up carefully, my legs steadier than I expected. I pulled my backup card from my wallet, the emergency visa I kept for actual emergencies, and handed it to the horrified server. "Run this one," I said, my voice calm, even. "It'll work." As I waited, I looked around the table. My mother fussed with her napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. Robert had returned to his seat, muttering about ungrateful children. Tess's friends were suddenly fascinated by their phones. But Tess herself was looking at me now, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Not sympathy exactly, but maybe recognition. Maybe she was finally old enough to understand what her birthday dinners had truly cost me. The server returned with my card and receipt. I added a 40% tip. He didn't deserve to suffer for our family drama. I signed my name with a steady hand. "Happy birthday, Tess," I said, then I walked out of the Sterling room, past the hostess, past the valet, and into the cool April night. My phone started buzzing before I even reached my car. Text after text, call after call. I didn't need to look to know what they said. But as I sat in the driver's seat, my cheeks still throbbing, something had finally shifted inside me. They thought the declined card meant I was broke. They thought they'd finally drained me dry. But they were wrong. That card had been declined because Robert had opened a supplementary account in my name 3 days ago, maxing it out before I'd even known it existed. I knew because I'd seen the notification that afternoon. I'd chosen not to transfer money to cover it. I'd wanted to see what would happen. Now I knew. And now, finally, I was done. I sat in my car for 20 minutes that night, engine off, just breathing. My phone lit up the darkness like a desperate lighthouse. 37 missed calls, 53 texts. I finally turned it face down and drove home in silence. To understand why I'd stayed so long, why I kept paying, you have to understand how it started. I was 11 when my mother met Robert. My father had left 3 years earlier, just walked out one Tuesday and never came back. No explanation, no child support, just gone. My mother never recovered. She wore her desperation like perfume, and Robert, a regional manager who wore too much cologne and laughed too loud at his own jokes, could smell it from across a crowded room. They married quickly. I was the only witness, wearing my Easter dress from 2 years before, its hem awkwardly hitting mid-calf. Robert had no family there. "They're all back in Ohio," he'd said, though I later learned he'd grown up in New Jersey. At first, he tried to win me over. Ice cream, movie tickets, the occasional, "How was school, kiddo?" But when I didn't immediately warm to him, when I didn't call him dad or laugh at his jokes, his interest curdled. "She's a bit cold, isn't she?" I heard him tell my mother one night. "Not very affectionate." "She's shy," my mother weakly defended. "She'll warm up." But I didn't. By the time I turned 14, Robert had stopped trying. I became furniture in my own home, something to work around, occasionally useful, mostly ignored. When Tess was born, I thought things might improve. A baby could soften anyone, right? Wrong. Tess's arrival only solidified my position. She was the real daughter, the wanted one, the fresh start. I was the reminder of my mother's failed first marriage, the sullen teenager who didn't fit the family portrait Robert wanted to project. "Lena, watch the baby while we go to dinner." "Lena, Tess needs a diaper change." "Lena, why is she crying? You must have done something." I became an unpaid nanny, expected to be grateful for the privilege. When I started bagging groceries at 15, Robert decided my paychecks were family contributions. "Room and board aren't free," he'd say, holding out his hand every Friday. "About time you learned that." My mother said nothing. She'd perfected the art of selective blindness by then, floating through life on a cloud of white wine and willful ignorance. As long as Robert stayed, as long as she wasn't alone again, she could pretend everything was fine. I saved what I could, hiding cash in a tampon box under my sink. $20 here, $30 there. It took 2 years to accumulate enough for college application fees. When my acceptance letter came from State University with a partial scholarship, Robert's first words were, "How are you planning to pay for the rest? Student loans? In this economy, you'll be paying those off until you're 50. Better to skip the whole thing. I can get you full-time at my buddy's warehouse." But I went anyway, surviving on ramen and determination. I majored in finance because I never wanted to be financially vulnerable again. I wanted to understand money, how to make it, keep it, grow it. How to never end up like my mother, dependent on a man who treated kindness like currency. During college, the requests started as emergencies. The car broke down and Robert's between jobs. "Just this once, we'll pay you back." Then, Tess needs braces. Insurance won't cover all of it. You understand, don't you? And the landlord's threatening eviction. Robert's commission check is late. Just until Friday. I promise. The promises were as empty as my bank account became. But I kept sending money because the alternative, letting my baby sister suffer for our parents' failures, felt worse than my own hunger pangs. After graduation, I got a job at Summit and Crew, entry-level but with a clear path upward. I moved into a studio apartment 40 minutes from my childhood home, far enough to feel like escape, close enough that my mother could still reach me with her guilt. The pattern solidified. I'd build up savings, then drain them for a family crisis. Robert's job losses became suspiciously regular, always right when rent was due. My mother developed mystery illnesses requiring expensive treatments insurance wouldn't cover. And Tess, sweet, spoiled Tess, always needed something for school, for dance, for the endless activities that would look good on college applications. "You don't have kids," my mother would remind me during our weekly calls. "You don't understand the expenses. And you're doing so well now. It's what family does." What family does, as if family was a one-way street where I gave and they took, where my success was communal property, but my struggles were mine alone. I started keeping a spreadsheet. Not out of resentment at first, just habit. I tracked everything in spreadsheets. But as the numbers grew, as $50 became $500, became $5,000, became more than I wanted to acknowledge, the document became something else. Evidence. Proof that I wasn't imagining the imbalance. $2,400 for Robert's emergency dental work that turned out to be cosmetic veneers. $3,800 for Tessa's dance competition trips. $15,000 over 3 years for their rent when Robert was between opportunities. $4,500 for my mother's therapy that I later learned were spa retreats. The spreadsheet grew like a tumor. Each line item a small betrayal. But I kept paying because that's what good daughters did. Because Tess was innocent in all of this. Because my mother would cry and say I was all she had. Because I didn't know how to stop. The thing about financial abuse is that it's so mundane. There's no dramatic music, no obvious villain twirling a mustache. Just a steady drain, like a leak in your roof that you keep meaning to fix until one day you look up and realize the whole ceiling is about to collapse. By my 30th birthday, I was making good money. I'd been promoted twice, had my own office with a window, drove a reliable car. From the outside, I'd made it. Inside, I was hollow. Every raise meant more money for them to request. Every bonus became a family emergency waiting to happen. I dated occasionally, but how do you explain to someone that you can't go on vacation because your mother needs new kitchen cabinets? How do you admit that you're a successful professional who can't say no to people who barely acknowledge your existence until they need something? "You'll understand when you have your own family," my mother said when I tried to set boundaries. Blood is blood. But Tess wasn't my blood, not fully. And Robert certainly wasn't. Yet somehow I'd become responsible for all of them. The family ATM that never ran empty. 3 months before Tess's 18th birthday, I finally started therapy. Dr. Marcus, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes, listened to my story without judgment. "Why do you think you keep giving them money?" she asked during our 4th session. "Because they need it," I said automatically. "Do they? Or do they just want it?" The question haunted me. Need versus want. Survival versus comfort. Love versus manipulation. What would happen if you said no? Dr. Marcus pressed gently. I couldn't answer because I'd never tried. The fear of their reaction, of being cast out completely, of proving Robert right that I was cold and unloving, it kept me compliant. But that night at the Sterling Room, with my cheeks stinging and the taste of blood in my mouth, I finally had my answer. Saying yes hadn't earned me love or respect or even basic kindness. It had only earned me a seat by the kitchen door and a slap when the well ran dry. They thought I was broke. Let them think it. The truth, that I had $47,000 in savings and excellent credit, would come out soon enough, but not in the way they expected. As I drove home that April night, I wasn't planning revenge yet. I was just done. Done pretending, done paying, done being the family safety net that everyone took for granted. But the universe has a funny way of showing you exactly who people are when you stop being useful to them. And my family was about to show me exactly who they'd always been. The calls started at 6 a.m. the next morning. My mother had apparently spent the night crafting the perfect guilt campaign, and she launched it with military precision. "Lena, honey, I'm so sorry about last night. Robert was just stressed about work. You know how he gets. But we need to talk about the bills. The mortgage is due Monday. And with your little stunt at dinner," I hung up. She called back immediately. I let it go to voicemail. "Lena, I'm really disappointed in you after everything we've done. Raising you, giving you a home." Tess was in tears all night. On her birthday. How could you be so selfish? Delete. By noon, the messages had evolved from guilt to anger to outright manipulation. Robert left 3 voicemails, threatening legal action for theft of services. Apparently, not paying for dinner constituted a crime in his mind. Tess sent a series of texts alternating between wounded innocence, "I thought you loved me," and teenage nastiness. "Tyler says you're probably jealous because you're single and bitter." I turned off my phone and went to work. "You look terrible," my colleague Marcus observed when I walked into the Monday morning meeting. "Everything okay?" "Family stuff," I said, and he nodded knowingly. Everyone had family stuff. But my family stuff was about to become more complicated than I'd imagined. When I finally turned my phone back on Tuesday evening, I had 43 missed calls from my mother, 18 from Robert, and 1 from my credit card company. The credit card message was the one that mattered. "This is regarding unusual activity on your account ending in 4458. Please call us immediately." I knew before I called what I'd find. The supplementary card Robert had opened, the one I discovered just before Tess's dinner, was just the tip of the iceberg. As the patient representative walked me through the recent charges, a picture emerged that was both shocking and sickeningly predictable. $8,000 at a jewelry store the day before Tess's birthday. $3,200 at Best Buy for what looked like an entire home entertainment system. $5,500 in cash advances. $2,100 at a high-end men's clothing store. All in the past 2 weeks. All on cards I didn't know existed. "We flagged these as potentially fraudulent," the representative said carefully. "Would you like to dispute them?" "Yes," I said. "All of them. And I need to check if there are any other accounts I don't know about." There were 3 credit cards, a personal line of credit, and this was the one that made my hands shake, an attempt to refinance my car that had only failed because they'd gotten my employment details wrong. 23 years of financial carefulness, of building perfect credit, of sacrificing and saving, and they'd tried to destroy it all in less than a month. I spent the rest of the week on the phone with banks, credit bureaus, and finally a lawyer named Patricia Hernandez, who specialized in financial fraud. "Family identity theft is more common than you'd think," Patricia said during our first meeting. She was in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found comforting. "It's also harder to prosecute because victims often refuse to press charges. They feel guilty. They make excuses. They enable." "I'm done enabling," I said. "Good. Then let's talk about your options." As Patricia outlined the legal process, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not for reconciliation. That ship had sailed the moment Robert's hand connected with my face. But for freedom. Real freedom. My mother, meanwhile, had moved to phase 3 of her campaign, recruiting flying monkeys. My phone buzzed with messages from cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all variations on the same theme. "Your mom is worried sick. Family is everything. Don't you think you're overreacting?" My favorite came from Aunt Helen, my mother's sister, who lived in Florida and had borrowed $3,000 from me 5 years ago for a medical emergency that turned out to be a facelift. "Your mother says you're having some kind of breakdown. Maybe you should see someone." I was seeing someone, Patricia Hernandez, and she was worth every penny of her $400 hourly rate. The evidence gathering was meticulous. Bank statements going back years. Email chains where my mother casually mentioned my social security number for insurance purposes. Text messages where Robert asked for my banking passwords to help with your taxes. Every red flag I'd ignored, every boundary I'd let them cross, it was all there in black and white. "This is good," Patricia said, reviewing my documentation. "Really good. But I need to warn you, once we file, there's no going back. This will likely result in criminal charges." "I understand." "Do you?" she pressed. Because your stepfather could face jail time. Your mother could be charged as an accomplice. Are you prepared for that? I thought about all the dinners I'd eaten alone in my studio apartment, too broke to go out after paying their bills. I thought about the vacations I'd never taken. The relationships that had withered because I was always too stressed about money to be fully present. I thought about the spreadsheet that showed I'd given them $128,000 over 12 years. Enough for a house down payment. Enough for a better life. Enough for the freedom I'd never allowed myself. I'm prepared, I said. Patricia nodded. Then let's discuss the nuclear option. You mentioned they've been claiming you as a dependent on their taxes. This was another discovery from my financial deep dive. For 3 years, Robert had listed me as a dependent to get a larger refund, even though I hadn't lived with them for over a decade. It was tax fraud, pure and simple. The IRS offers whistleblower rewards, Patricia explained. Up to 30% of the recovered amount. Given what you've shown me, we're looking at significant back taxes, penalties, and interest. The number she quoted made me dizzy. It was more than I made in a year. But the money wasn't the point. The point was consequences. For once in their lives, Robert and my mother would face actual consequences. That Friday, 2 weeks after Tessa's birthday dinner, my mother showed up at my office. Security called up to warn me, and I watched on the lobby camera feed as she argued with the guard. Her designer purse, one I'd probably paid for, clutched dramatically to her chest. I'm her mother, she kept insisting. This is a family emergency. The only emergency was that their cash cow had finally run dry. I had security escort her out. She left sobbing, mascara running down her cheeks. Several of my coworkers saw the scene, and I felt the familiar burn of embarrassment. But underneath it was something new, relief. That weekend, I went apartment hunting. Not because I needed to move, my studio was fine. But because I could. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't mentally calculating how much I'd need to keep in reserve for the next family crisis. My money was actually mine. I found a 1-bedroom in a better neighborhood with actual closet space and a balcony overlooking a small park. The rent was only $200 more than my studio, but in the past, that would have been $200 I couldn't spare. I'll take it, I told the landlord. While packing, I found the tampon box where I'd hidden cash as a teenager. Inside was $340 in crumpled bills, my escape fund that had never been enough to actually escape. I smoothed out each bill, remembering the shifts I'd worked, the lunches I'd skipped, the freedom I'd dreamed of. Now I had that freedom. But it had come at a price I was still calculating. Tess texted while I was packing. Mom says you're being a bitch. Dad might lose his job because of you. Hope you're happy. I stared at the message for a long moment. Dad. She called him Dad. This man who'd stolen from both of us. But she was 18 now, an adult who'd made her choice. She'd sat there and watched him hit me. Had smiled and whispered to her boyfriend like it was dinner theater. I typed back, I am happy. For the first time in years. Good luck at college. Then I blocked her. The moving truck was scheduled for next Saturday. Patricia would file the paperwork on Monday. The IRS would begin their investigation within the month. The wheels I'd set in motion couldn't be stopped now, even if I wanted to stop them. And I didn't want to stop them. That night, in my soon-to-be former studio, I opened a bottle of wine. Good wine, not the cheap stuff I usually bought, and updated my spreadsheet one last time. At the bottom, I added a new column, amount recovered. It was still at 0. But it wouldn't stay that way. For 12 years, I'd paid the price for their love. Now, it was time for them to pay it back. With interest. Moving day came with an unexpected spectator. I was carrying boxes down to the truck when I spotted Robert's silver Lexus, the one I'd co-signed for 2 years ago, parked across the street. He sat behind the wheel, watching me with the kind of focused intensity that made my skin crawl. I ignored him and kept loading boxes. 20 minutes later, my mother joined him in the passenger seat. They sat there for 3 hours, occasional cigarette smoke drifting from Robert's cracked window, as if their presence alone might guilt me into stopping the move, dropping the charges, resuming my role as the family ATM. My new apartment building had better security, a doorman, key card access, cameras in the lobby. It cost more, but Patricia had advised me to upgrade my safety measures. People get unpredictable when money's involved, she'd warned, especially family. The legal papers were served the following Monday. Patricia had suggested having them delivered to Robert's workplace for maximum impact and to ensure he couldn't claim he never received them. I wasn't there to see his face, but I heard about it later from a former coworker who still talked to someone at Robert's company. He went ballistic, she told me over coffee, screaming about ungrateful children and conspiracies. Security had to escort him out. He's on administrative leave pending investigation. The investigation was the key. Once banks and credit companies know fraud is involved, they dig deep. Every suspicious transaction, every forged signature, every lie comes to light. And Robert had been sloppy, arrogant in his certainty that I'd never fight back. My mother tried a different approach. She started sending emails, long, rambling messages that alternated between nostalgic memories and veiled threats. Remember when you were 7 and had pneumonia? I stayed up all night with you, putting cold washcloths on your forehead. I never left your side. Then, your father left us with nothing. Nothing. Robert saved us. He took us in when no one else would. Followed by, you're destroying our lives. Tess won't even come out of her room. She might not go to college now because of you. And the chilling, I know where you work. I know your routines. You can't hide forever. I forwarded every email to Patricia. Documentation was everything. Now, the financial forensics revealed more than even I had expected. Not only had Robert been stealing from me, he'd been running similar scams on 2 elderly neighbors, convincing them to add him to their accounts to help with bills. He'd taken one for $15,000, the other for $22,000. This changes things, Patricia explained. With multiple victims, the DA will definitely pursue criminal charges. Elder financial abuse is a felony. I felt sick. How many others had there been? How many people had Robert charmed and robbed while I was enabling him by covering his family expenses? 3 weeks into the legal process, I experienced my first real victory. The credit bureaus removed all the fraudulent accounts from my report. My score, which had plummeted to 580, jumped back to 745. It was just numbers on a screen, but I cried when I saw it. Years of careful building, destroyed in weeks, now restored with the stroke of a judge's pen. The restraining order came next, after the emails escalated and Robert was caught on my new building's cameras trying to talk his way past the doorman. Patricia fast-tracked the protective order. The hearing was the first time I'd seen my mother since she'd shown up at my office. She'd aged 10 years in a month. Her usually perfect hair hung limp. Her designer clothes replaced with an ill-fitting pantsuit. She wouldn't look at me, keeping her eyes fixed on her lawyer, a public defender, since they couldn't afford Patricia's equivalent. Robert wasn't there. He'd been arrested the night before on the elder fraud charges and was sitting in county jail, unable to make bail. Without my income or the money he'd stolen, they were broke. Your Honor, my mother's lawyer began. My client is this young woman's mother. Surely a restraining order between parent and child is excessive. Your client, the judge interrupted, reviewing the file, is named as an accomplice in multiple counts of identity theft and fraud. The emails submitted show a clear pattern of harassment and escalating threats. The order is granted. 500 feet. They couldn't come within 500 feet of me, my home, or my workplace. It was a circle of safety, legally enforced. As we left the courthouse, my mother finally looked at me. For a second, her mask slipped, and I saw pure hatred in her eyes. Not disappointment, not hurt. Hatred, as if I was the one who'd stolen, who'd lied, who'd drained her dry. I hope you're happy, she hissed. I'm getting there, I replied. The IRS moved slower than the criminal courts, but Patricia assured me they were thorough. The audit notice arrived at my mother's house, my former home, in late May. 3 years of fraudulent returns claiming me as a dependent, plus Robert's unreported income from his various scams, plus penalties and interest. The total they owed was staggering. Tess graduated high school the first week of June. I knew because her Instagram was still public, filled with photos of her in cap and gown. My mother stood beside her in one photo, smile strained, looking gaunt and wearing a dress I recognized from 5 years ago. Robert was notably absent, still in jail, awaiting trial. I felt a pang looking at those photos. Tess looked young, scared beneath her smile. College was probably off the table now. At least the expensive state school she'd planned on. Community college and student loans would be her reality, the same reality I'd faced at her age, but for very different reasons. Part of me wanted to reach out to offer money. I almost laughed at the thought. The cycle trying to perpetuate itself already. No. Tess had made her choice that night at the restaurant. She'd have to live with the consequences, just like I had. My therapy sessions with Dr. Marcus became a lifeline during this period. You're grieving, she observed during one session. Not for who they were, but for who he wanted them to be. She was right. I mourned the mother who'd never existed, the one who would have protected me instead of serving me up to keep her husband happy. I mourned the sister who might have been, if she hadn't been taught from birth that I was the hired help. I even mourned the life I might have had, the savings, the travel, the peace of mind, if I hadn't spent 12 years lighting myself on fire to keep them warm. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects, stayed late, volunteered for presentations. My boss, Sarah, noticed the change. "You seem different," she said during my quarterly review. "More confident, more present." "I've had some personal changes," I admitted. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. We're promoting you to senior manager." The pay increase was substantial. The number she quoted was more than I'd ever made, more than Robert had ever made, even with his inflated claims about his sales prowess. I signed the paperwork with hands that barely shook. That night, I went out to celebrate. Alone, but not lonely. I sat at the bar of an upscale restaurant, the kind of place I'd never have gone before, too worried about saving money for the next family emergency. I ordered a good steak and better wine. "Celebrating something?" the bartender asked. "My independence," I said, raising my glass. He smiled and poured himself a shot of water. "To independence." We clinked glasses, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, uncomplicated joy. No guilt attached, no worry about what it would cost me later. Just happiness, clean and bright as the wine in my glass. The emails from my mother had stopped after the restraining order. But others had taken up the cause. Distant relatives, family, friends, even my old high school guidance counselor reached out. All with versions of "family is everything" and "you'll regret this someday." I didn't respond to any of them. They hadn't been there for the midnight calls about money. They hadn't watched my bank account drain month after month. They hadn't felt the sting of Robert's hand or the weight of my mother's calculated blindness. Let them judge. I was done explaining myself to people who'd already chosen their side. Patricia called with updates regularly. Robert's public defender was trying to plea bargain, but with multiple victims and a clear pattern of fraud, the DA wasn't interested in deals. Trial was set for September. "You'll need to testify," Patricia warned. Are you ready for that? Was I ready to sit in a courtroom and detail 12 years of financial abuse? To look Robert in the eye and tell the truth he'd always denied? To watch my mother's face as I explained how they'd systematically destroyed my trust along with my credit? "I'm ready," I said. And I was. A birthday card arrived in July, 2 months after my move. It was forwarded from my old address. My mother's handwriting, shaky, on the redirected envelope. Inside, a generic Hallmark message about daughters, with her signature at the bottom. No personal note, no mention of everything that had happened, just her name. And tucked inside, a photo. It was from Tessa's 5th birthday party. I was 19, home from college for the weekend, holding a giggling Tess on my hip while she smeared chocolate cake on my cheek. We were both laughing. I looked young, hopeful, unaware that I was already 3 years into paying for their lives. I stared at the photo for a long time, then placed it in my desk drawer. Not in the trash, but not on display either. Some things deserve to be remembered, even if they hurt. August brought the trial prep. Patricia's office became my second home as we reviewed 12 years of evidence, bank statements, emails, text messages, recorded phone calls. My obsessive documentation was about to pay off. "You're my favorite kind of client," Patricia said one afternoon, reviewing my files. Organized, thorough, and angry enough to see this through. "I'm not angry," I protested. She looked at me over her glasses. "You should be. They stole more than money from you. They stole years of your life." She was right. I was angry. Furious, actually. But it was a cold fury now, crystallized into purpose. They'd taken enough. Not 1 penny more. The week before the trial, I had an unexpected visitor at work. Tess stood in the lobby, looking smaller than her 18 years in a sundress I didn't recognize. Security called up, and I debated refusing to see her, but curiosity won. We met in the public cafe on the ground floor, safe, neutral territory, with plenty of witnesses. "You look good," she said, fidgeting with her iced coffee. "The promotion suits you." "How did you know about that?" "LinkedIn. I've been keeping track." We sat in silence for a moment. Up close, I could see the stress in her face, dark circles, bitten nails, the kind of thinness that comes from anxiety rather than diet. "Why are you here, Tess?" I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." About the restaurant. About everything. I waited. Sorry was a start, but it wasn't enough. "I've been thinking," she continued, "about all those years you were always there, always helping. And I just took advantage." She flinched, but nodded. Mom says you're being vindictive, that you're trying to destroy us, but I've been going through old photos, old emails. You paid for everything, didn't you? My dance classes, my school trips, even my prom dress. Yes. Why? It was such a simple question, but the answer was complicated. Because you were a kid. Because it wasn't your fault. Because I thought if I gave enough, eventually I'd get something back. Love. Respect would have been enough. She started crying then. Ugly sobs that drew stares from other patrons. I handed her napkins and waited. I'd cried enough of my own tears. I could weather hers. I testified yesterday, she said when she could speak again. For the prosecution. About the birthday dinner. About things I overheard. About Dad. Robert bragging about using your information. This was news. Patricia hadn't mentioned Tess was cooperating. That must have been hard. He's been lying to us for years. Taking money from other people, too. Mom knew. She had to know. Tess wiped her eyes. I got into state university, but I can't go. No money, and no one will co-sign loans because of all this. I'm taking a gap year, working at Target. The old me would have offered to help, would have reached for my checkbook to fix it, to ease her pain. But I kept my hands folded on the table. Community college is a good option, I said instead. That's where I started. Transfer after 2 years. It's cheaper, and you'll get the same degree. You're not going to help me. It wasn't a question. And I respected her more for not making it one. No, I'm not. Not with money. But if you want advice about financial aid, scholarships, building credit, I can offer that. She nodded, gathering her dignity. That's fair. More than fair, probably. We talked for another 20 minutes, not about the trial or the family, but about practical things, budgeting, FAFSA applications, work-study programs, the kind of guidance I'd had to figure out alone at her age. When she left, she paused at the door. Lena, that night at the restaurant, I should have said something when he hit you. I was scared, but that's not an excuse. I'm sorry. Thank you, I said, and meant it. That weekend, I did something I'd been putting off. I went through the physical reminders of my old life, boxes of photos, birthday cards, the world's best sister mug Tess had given me when she was 7. Each item was a small grief, a moment when I believed things might get better. I kept a few things, the mug, because it reminded me of the hopeful child Tess had been. A photo of my college graduation where I stood alone because my family had been too busy to attend. A card my mother had given me when I got my first job, back when she still seemed proud of me. The rest went into the donation bin. Someone else could use the picture frames, the knickknacks, the costume jewelry my mother had regifted to me over the years. I didn't need artifacts from a life I was leaving behind. The trial started on a Tuesday. I wore my best suit, the charcoal one I'd bought for important client meetings. Patricia met me outside the courthouse, briefcase in hand and war face on. Remember, she said, stick to the facts. Don't editorialize. Let the evidence speak for itself. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Robert sat at the defense table, wearing an ill-fitting suit and the expression of a man who'd finally run out of people to con. He'd lost weight in jail, his face gaunt, that commanding presence reduced to nothing. My mother sat in the gallery, front row. She wore black, as if in mourning, clutching tissues she never actually used. When I took the stand, our eyes met briefly. I searched for something, remorse, understanding, even honest hatred. But there was only the same calculated blankness she'd perfected over the years. Testifying was easier than I'd expected. Patricia had prepared me well, and the prosecutor walked me through the evidence methodically. Bank statements appeared on screens. Emails were read into the record. That comprehensive spreadsheet displayed for the jury to see. Can you tell us the total amount you gave to the defendants over 12 years? $128,743, I said clearly, not including interest on credit cards they opened in my name or opportunities one missed because I couldn't afford them. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a bitter woman seeking revenge. He highlighted my good salary, my promotion, suggested I could afford to help family in need. Isn't it true you voluntarily gave these funds? No one forced you. Financial coercion is still force, I replied. When you're told your sister won't eat unless you pay. When you're blamed for every hardship. When helping is the only way to maintain any relationship with your family, yes, that's force. He pushed harder, but the evidence was overwhelming. The credit cards opened without permission. The tax fraud. The elderly neighbors Robert had robbed. It painted a picture of systematic, deliberate crime. I was on the stand for 3 hours. When I finally stepped down, I felt empty but clean, like I'd lanced an infection that had been poisoning me for years. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Robert's face when they read the verdict was something I'll never forget. The moment a man who'd always talked his way out of consequences realized the bill had finally come due. Sentencing would come later, but the prosecutor estimated 3 to 5 years plus restitution. My mother wasn't charged as an accomplice, insufficient evidence of direct participation, but she'd lost everything anyway. The house, the car, the lifestyle built on my exhaustion and others' trust. Outside the courthouse, Patricia shook my hand. You did good. How do you feel? Free, I said. She smiled. That's the point. The money you'll get from restitution and the IRS whistleblower claim, that's just bonus. The real win is getting your life back. That night, I sat in my apartment, my safe, quiet apartment, and opened a bottle of champagne. I'd bought it the day I filed charges, saving it for this moment. The cork popped with a satisfying sound, and I poured a glass, toasting to no one but myself. My phone sat silent on the counter. No guilt trip calls, no emergency texts, no demands disguised as requests. Just peaceful, blessed silence. I thought about Tess starting her job at Target next week. About my mother probably staying with one of those relatives who'd said family was everything. About Robert sitting in a cell, no one left to manipulate. They'd all made their choices. Now they were living with them. And for the first time in my adult life, so was I, September arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made everything feel possible. I'd been living in silence for 3 weeks. No family drama, no crisis calls, no emotional manipulation disguised as love. Just the normal rhythm of work, sleep, and slowly learning who I was without the weight of other people's expectations. Then Patricia called with news that would change everything. The IRS investigation is complete, she said. Are you sitting down? I was at my desk, reviewing quarterly reports. Should I be? The whistleblower claim was approved. With back taxes, penalties, and interest from 3 years of fraudulent returns, plus unreported income from Robert's various schemes, the total recovery is $247,000. Your portion is 30%. I did the math automatically, $74,100. Not a fortune, but more than I'd ever had at once. More than I'd given them in some years. There's more, Patricia continued. The criminal restitution hearing is next week. The judge will order Robert to repay what he stole, including the elderly neighbors. You're first in line as a creditor. How much from the fraudulent credit cards and identity theft? $31,000. Whether you'll ever see it is another question, but it'll follow him for life. No bankruptcy discharge for criminal restitution. After I hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen. The numbers meant less than I'd expected. What mattered was what they represented. Validation. Proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't selfish, wasn't the ungrateful daughter they'd painted me as. The system had looked at the evidence and sided with me. That weekend, I did something I'd been afraid to do for months. I checked Tessa's social media. Her Instagram had gone private, but her LinkedIn was public. She'd started at Target, but her profile also mentioned weekend classes at community college, business administration major. I felt a flicker of pride. She was figuring it out the hard way, like I had. My mother's Facebook was still public, probably because she didn't know how to change the settings. The carefully curated life was gone. No more restaurant check-ins or shopping hauls. The most recent post was a shared article about forgiveness, with her comment, "Some people can hold grudges forever. I choose love and light." The comments below were a masterclass in enabling. Stay strong, Linda. Family troubles are so hard. Prayers. Your daughter will regret this one day. I almost laughed. Love and light, but only when it didn't cost her anything. The restitution hearing was brief. Robert appeared in an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles. The federal charges meant he'd been transferred to a higher security facility. He kept his eyes down as the judge read the order, $31,000 to me, $37,000 total to the elderly neighbors. Payment plans to begin upon release. My mother wasn't there. Small mercies. October brought unexpected changes. Sarah, my boss, pulled me into her office for a conversation I didn't see coming. We're opening a new branch in Chicago, she said. I want you to run it. Full relocation package, significant salary increase, and a chance to build your own team. Chicago. 800 miles from here, from them, from every restaurant and street corner that held memories I wanted to forget. When do you need an answer? Take a week. This is a big decision. But it wasn't really. I accepted the next day. The move happened fast. The company hired professional packers, arranged temporary housing, even flew me out for a long weekend to look at apartments. I chose a high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Lake Michigan. It cost 3 times my old studio, but I could afford it now, not just financially, but emotionally. I deserved nice things. I deserved a view. My last week in town, I had one final visitor. Dr. Marcus had agreed to see me for an extra session before I transferred to a colleague in Chicago. "How are you feeling about the move?" she asked. Relieved, excited, a little guilty. Guilty for being happy? For not feeling worse about how things ended? Shouldn't I be grieving more? Dr. Marcus smiled. "You've been grieving for years. For the family you should have had, the support you deserved, the life you might have lived. The fact that you can feel joy now? That's not something to feel guilty about. That's healing." She was right. I'd done my grieving in real time, spread over 12 years of disappointment. This wasn't the sharp pain of fresh loss. It was the dull ache of accepting what had always been true. They'd never loved me the way I'd loved them. And that was okay. It had to be. My going-away party at work was small but warm. Colleagues I'd kept at arm's length for years suddenly felt like the family I'd chosen. They gave me a Cubs jersey and a deep-dish pizza cookbook, joking that I'd need to learn the local customs. Marcus from accounting pulled me aside. "I'm glad you're getting out," he said quietly. "Fresh starts are underrated." Speaking from experience, left my entire family in Texas 10 years ago. Best decision I ever made. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. The night before my flight, I did a final check of my old apartment. Everything was gone except the echo of my footsteps on hardwood floors. I stood at the window where I'd watched my mother and Robert in their car that day, trying to intimidate me into compliance. They'd lost, not just in court, but in the larger battle for my life. They'd wanted me small, grateful, perpetually giving. Instead, I was leaving bigger, freer, and finally putting myself first. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Lena." The voice was thin, aged. It took me a moment to recognize Aunt Helen. "I'm calling about your mother." "I can't help her. She's sick. Really sick this time. Cancer. She needs." I hung up. Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd paid for her choices and Robert's and even Tessa's. For over a decade, the Bank of Lena was permanently closed. The flight to Chicago was bumpy, but I didn't mind. Turbulence felt appropriate for a life change this big. I pressed my face to the window as the city appeared below, massive, sprawling, full of possibility. My temporary housing was a furnished corporate apartment in the Loop. I arrived at sunset, the sky painting the buildings gold and pink. After the driver left, I stood at the window, 30 floors up, watching the city pulse with life below. I was alone. No family within hundreds of miles. No one who knew my history, my old role as the family savior. I could be anyone here. I could be myself, whoever that turned out to be. That night, I ordered Thai food from a place down the street. When the delivery guy asked if I was new to the building, I said yes. "Welcome to Chicago," he said with a genuine smile. "You're going to love it here." As I ate my pad thai in my corporate apartment, surrounded by boxes and possibility, I thought about the IRS check that would arrive soon, about the job that started Monday, about the life I was building on my own terms. The old me would have felt guilty for not sharing this good fortune, would have calculated how much I could send home, how much suffering I could alleviate. But the old me had died in that restaurant with the taste of blood in her mouth and her cheeks stinging from a slap she'd never seen coming. This new me? She was keeping every